Hello and welcome to Season of War. Today we're going to be talking about the Age of Sigmar points changes we wanted to see in the Winter FAQ. If you didn't know, Games Workshop has finally released the Winter FAQ for AOS, but unfortunately the communities found it a little underwhelming. While there were some minor rules clarifications, unfortunately there was no points balancing done, so that's what we're going to be talking about today. If you do want to learn about what rules were clarified in the FAQ, I'd recommend heading over to the AOS Coach's YouTube channel, checking out the video he put out on that. And if you're like me and think sarcasm is the best coping mechanism for disappointment, then head over to the Honest Wargamer channel and check out the stream they did going over all the changes as well. You can find links to both those videos in the description below, so definitely check them out after this video. Now, the AOS community really relies on these points updates every 6 months to help balance things out and keep the game fresh, which is why it really hurts in this case after delays that we don't get any update to the game at all. It's a tough pill to swallow, being that Warhammer 40k just got some major updates to the game. Now they are coming off of a new version of the game, but still really hurts that we didn't get any balancing done on our end. But since Games Workshop said they're not aware of what changes need to be made at this time, I thought we'd start the discussion here and go over some of the major issues that needed to be addressed in the FAQ. And why not start with some of the worst offenders and most abusive factions that needed to see points increases? First up is Seraphon, and like Games Workshop often does, we do want to go in with a bit of a light touch, not nerfing anything too hard, as we're just trying to balance things out a little bit, take the sharp edges off the real bad offenders here, and make the game a little bit more enjoyable for those of us who are able to play in person, able to do events around the world, or playing on TTS. Now we have to talk about Skink Hordes as they are covering tables worldwide, and while I do think they could go up maybe 10 points, I think the issue lies more so in the supporting cast of heroes in Seraphon that bring a ton of value to the army, really buff up those units and make them devastating. Of course, we're talking about the Skink Priest and Star Priest. Both these heroes have great abilities, command abilities, and then one of them has an amazing spell also. Both these guys easily could go up 20 points, I feel. Keeping in mind that they both also have a great shooting attack with 1 rend, which is pretty wild for like small cheap heroes. Now the Star Priest is already 120, so putting him up to 140 would hurt a lot. But he does provide just so much value, both in ability, command ability, spell, and then having that shooting attack that does D3 damage with 1 rend. So I don't think putting him up 20 points is that out of the question. Of course now, the biggest bad in Seraphon is Lord Kroak. Everyone wants to see him go up in points. He's tremendous value at that 320 point mark. And looking at his command point generation alone, he's basically free after you factor that in. And since the most recent Seraphon Battle Tome dropped, he has been an auto-include in the army. There's really no competitive builds that don't take him, making it just so clear that he does need to go up in points. I think starting with 40 is actually a pretty moderate way to go. You could easily see him going up to 400, but I think just starting with 40 points in conjunction with some of these other changes to Seraphon will go a long way in terms of reducing the overall power of this faction and how many tools they're able to fit in that army. And then one of the other changes we wanted to see in the Seraphon FAQ is addressing the bound endless spells. Now with the bound endless spells, Seraphon players are basically getting double the value of those endless spells compared to other factions. And for only 10 points more, it's a steal. So I think we should be looking at increasing the cost of bound endless spells by 20 to 40 points and applying that differently to different endless spells, because there are some that are more impactful than others and should be addressed accordingly, with spells like Geminids, of course, being on the higher end of that scale. Next up is Tzeentch, and particularly the units and build of Change Host. Now, I don't think we should change the points of the battalion itself. It's already quite expensive at 180 points. I do think looking at the units that are within the battalion, your flamers and horrors, now just a small change of 10 to 20 points helps curb those units. It just helps reduce how many tools and how much output those armies are able to have and put into one list, as it is so strong. And while lately the more popular emerging build in Tzeentch has been the Tzeentch Archaon builds, which have been a ton of fun to see on the table, I don't think that really provides any issues. There's a lot of downsides to that army and build. I don't think there's anything that needs to be addressed points-wise at the moment. Now, the Lumineth Realm Lords. And if you follow the channel, you know I am a big fan of my elves, and particularly jumped right into the Lumineth Realm Lords when they released. I think there are really 2 main talking points when looking at Lumineth. The first being Sentinels and the second being Techless. Now I straight up take Sentinels in almost every list I play, often running about 30 in a balanced build with Techless. And straight up, I think Sentinels need to go up 20 points immediately. 160 points at minimum. That unit just has so many tools, Whether it's the long range, ignoring line of sight, doing mortals on 5-ups, being a spellcaster, -1 to hit in Shining Company, they just have so much going for them. I don't think there's any excuse for them to be worth 140 points only. They're a tremendous unit that really threaten the board edge to edge, so I don't think there should be any trouble raising that unit up. It would also really punish the heavy Sentinel spam builds that everyone's been seeing and is really tired of, and just balancing this one unit helps temper that kind of a build. Now, looking at tech lists, some people think he should go up in points while others actually say he's a trap and shouldn't be taken at all. But I actually think he is pretty good where he is. Also taking into account, if we do change Sentinels, the balanced builds with Teclis are already going up 60 points at least. So I think Teclis being as costly as he already is, kind of that big model syndrome where he takes up such a big chunk of your army, I do think that's a pretty good spot for him at the moment. But that could be one example of where seeing more games and getting more data would maybe help us know where to go fine-tuning some units like him. The last change I think Lumineth needs is to the Hit-Chain Twinstones Endless Spell. After the original FAQ to the Battle Tome, the Twinstones were confirmed to give basically +2 to cast to all of your wizards within 12 inches, which is huge obviously for Lumineth, and became an auto-include at only 30 points. And 10 might be all that's needed, as the change to Sentinels alone again is going to have a big ripple effect in the army. And things like Endless Spells are going to be the first things dropped from lists anyways. Alright, next up is the Idoneth Deepkin, and my primary competitive faction for the last 2 years, an army I love so much. Again, you know me and my love for elves. Before diving into the changes we might expect for Deepkin though, I think it's worth addressing Deepkin's particular spot in the meta. It's with the resurgence of shooting that we've really seen Deepkin climb the ladder and go from a strong army to a top tier faction that consistently wins events. But I think it's been the organic changes in the meta that have really turned the tides in Deepkin's favor, being such a hard counter to those shooting armies. When you look at Deepkin just as a combat army and match them up against other combat armies, they actually come out pretty even, if not a little bit lower in my opinion. Looking at armies like Flesh Eater Courts, Slaanesh, your Oryx, they have a tougher time in those matches, particularly in the higher drop MSU builds, not to mention the tankier combat armies like OBR, Nurgle, and Fire Slayers. I think all these other armies are really suffering a ton in the meta, and the only reason you're seeing Deepkin doing so well is not only because of their rules against shooting, but because all these other combat factions that can challenge and go toe-to-toe with Deepkin have really fallen out of the meta because of all the shooting. All that said, I do think Morrsarr Guard need to go up at least 280 points. Now you could make the argument to put them up to 190, but I am hesitant just because of their position in the meta. If shooting gets addressed or tempered a little bit and all the combat armies come back, Deepkin isn't going to be as powerful as they are right now. So I hesitate to make a change that might balance them against shooting armies, but really punishes them too much against some of those combat armies. But we did get some other changes from the Morathi book, and obviously some great buffs and better parity in the faction as a whole. Looking at the Alopexes and Leviatans, I think the Alopexes can easily go up 10 points and the Leviatans potentially 20, as both those units do add tons of great utility to the faction, whether it's shooting, the Shark's Net reducing pile-in, or the defensive aura from the turtle, which is hugely impactful. Now for the Kharadron Overlords. Now there's no doubt that KO has definitely been in a dominant position for the last year, particularly on the back of the Barrett Zilfin subfaction. Now looking at KO, I actually don't think we need to make any points changes specifically, but rather just address this subfaction individually. Like OBR's Petrifex Elite of old, it's really the main culprit and the subfaction that's skewing the power level of KO in my opinion. So I think if GW just addresses that subfaction, it'll go a long way in terms of balancing the army as a whole. Otherwise, of course, Spell in the Bottle is also a troublemaker. No points to change there, but I do think it could use a little bit of a rules tweak, just allowing opponents maybe to try to unbind it when it is used, even giving it maybe a +2 to cast, so it's a little bit harder to unbind, but it at least gives opponents a chance to interact with that ability and spell, which I think is sorely needed. And last but not least, we have Endless Spells. Of course, we all want Geminids to go up at least to 80 points, and the Warp Lightning Vortex to go up to 100, please. It was a travesty that came down in points again, especially being a very big problem with the KO Spell in the Bottle. Now that we've gone through the factions that needed to go up in points, let's just quickly list off some of the ones that need to go down. First off, Beast of Chaos is in a real bad spot, so nearly across the board, I think a ton of their units can go down in points and would be a big boost to that faction. We have Nighthaunt, which is a beautiful model range, and unfortunately just isn't cutting it on the tabletop right now. While we'd love to see some tweaks to the rules and some of their buff ranges increased, At least dropping some of their horde units in points would allow them maybe to take a unit or two extra and hopefully perform as intended. Right now in the meta, they're not actually near as durable of a horde unit as they should be, and they don't have much offensive output, so they don't really have a lot going for them right now, unfortunately. Similarly, Legions of Nagash could use some sweeping changes, but given that we are expecting the Soulblight Gravelord faction to come out in the next couple months, any changes here aren't necessarily expected to be long-lasting. Let's look at Sylvaneth. Now, Kurnoth Hunters I think could go down 10 points. They are one of the bright spots of the factions, but I think at 180 points it isn't a bad spot for them. And then we could look at the various Tree Lord builds, both the Ancient, the regular Tree Lord, and Durthu. I think all of those could come down 20 to 30 points. Now that just about covers all the changes we would have loved to see in the Winter FAQ from Games Workshop. Now, Age of Sigmar is a game we love and has such an amazing community, so I think that's why it really hurts for us not to have received any changes in the FAQ that really help try and balance the game for the community. But these were just our ideas and a few ways that we could bring some competitive balance to AOS. And I want to give a big shout out to our competitive Season of War team, who are all passionate and talented players. And it was our group discussions that really helped form all these ideas we've talked about. But I'd love to hear what you guys think of some of the changes we've proposed to balance the points in AOS, as well as any other ideas that you guys might have or changes that you think need to be made to the game. So join the discussion in the comments below, but just remember, we're all human and have a shared love and passion for AOS, so always treat each other with respect. But that's it for this video. I do hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you again soon.